Today we're going to be taking a look at Everwind, a kind of new sandbox survival game that launched into early access. Yes, this is a game and not a Minecraft mod with a texture pack. This game came out about a month ago, and I was going to cover it during its release week, but I kind of got sidetracked by some other games, mainly Screamer and then Super Meat Boy 3D, which we'll be talking about on the channel soon. I gave Everwind a bit of time, but I initially wasn't feeling it, and also because this game is in early access, I thought I'd give it a couple of weeks to see what or if the developers do anything with the game. And maybe see if the rougher edges of the game get smoothed out. Which it kind of didn't, but at least the developers seem to be aware of some of the issues that I have with the game. There probably isn't any way to talk about Everwind without also talking about the game it was so obviously inspired by. The game that is like Minecraft, but not Minecraft, is a genre that seems to be gaining some popularity of late. There was the relaunch of Hytale, and of course Everwind. There's also Alamera, which was that game that got DMCA during Steam Next Fest just recently, though that got rescinded. And there's even another game sitting in the new and trending tab at the moment called Lay of the Land, as I'm writing the script for this video. And I'm sure a lot of these games could have possibly just been mods for Minecraft, but I don't really mind that developers want to go and make their own games out of their own ideas, as long as the game has a good hook to it. So what is the hook to Everwind, and is it enough to stand out on its own? So before we get started, I do have a disclaimer to make. I was given a key by the developers for review purposes, and while I don't think this will affect my final conclusions on the game, I will always disclose when I'm given something for free so you all have the information to inform your own decisions. Also, this game is an early access game, which means anything that I talk about can and will be subject to change, and if there are any major changes or corrections I need to make after the video is published, then expect to see them as a pinned comment below, or potentially a follow-up video if need be. Everwind has the bones of Minecraft in it. Digging, mining, woodcutting, the shapes of the blocks, crafting and cooking tables, anvils, smithing. I'm going to skip over this. It's close to identical. The survival crafting loop in Everwind is pretty stock standard. The difference comes more from how exploration and progression works in the game. Everwind's main draw is that the world is comprised of a bunch of procedurally generated floating islands in the sky, and that you can build an airship to go and explore them. Your airship is essentially your portable home that you explore the world with, and this allows the game to be more focused on exploration, which is definitely this game's strong suit. And I'll admit that the game has a lot of good ideas and mechanics in general, but a lot of its implementation does feel a bit wonky. The game starts you off with a tutorial on the basics of how the game works and will take you all the way up to finding and building your first airship. And as soon as this happens, the game just stops giving you quests or any direction in the game, and then you're just off. Making and flying the airship is actually a really cool experience, but as everyone will soon come to find, the ship is very, very slow. Over the course of the game, you can upgrade and add extra parts which will increase the speed and the height the ship can reach, which the game does a pretty poor job of explaining how it all works, but there is a central crystal on the ship which controls the limits that the ship can reach, but you also need to build extra parts on top of that so the ship can actually reach those limits, which is something that is kind of poorly communicated. A word of advice, build your ship in a way that will accommodate future upgrades, because you will need to add a whole bunch of extra parts, and if you're like me, then you'll have to kind of rebuild the structure of your ship to accommodate all of that later on, and it will take like half an hour. In theory, I like the way that it all works. The ship customization is pretty much, you're building a Minecraft house, but that house can move, so it is up to your imagination. As you can see, my imagination is pretty piss poor. I like how it all works, but it feels like the base speed is ludicrously slow. Hell, even when I made it further into the game and I can, add a whole bunch of extra parts, I still find myself having like 5 minutes downtime between traveling between islands. On one hand, the time you take, flying between islands is a good time to get crafting and cooking stuff done. On the other hand, it is still just a bit too slow, and the amount of resources needed to build extra stuff to upgrade your ship is a hassle for what little you get out of it. Progression in this game is mostly tied to exploration, with how high you can go being how much more likely high tier stuff will appear. Something that's kind of interesting about the game is that despite the gameplay feeling very Minecraft coded, breaking, building and harvesting resources, which is the main draw of Minecraft, actually feels secondary to what Everwind wants you to do, which is, to explore. You'll be rewarded much more greatly for going to islands, going to all of the points of interest and then looting everything and leaving, rather than staying and harvesting the resources and mining down and doing the normal Minecraft stuff, which is very strange for a game that is pretty much built off of the Minecraft framework. There are many dungeons in the game, and it was rare, if ever, that I ever had to use my pickaxe to break blocks or place blocks to get anywhere that I couldn't reach. There are some side walls that have like chests behind them that you need to just break one block to find a hidden chest, but again, this kind of stuff feels rare. It feels like the game expects you to play as if you can't just destroy everything in the dungeon at will. Exploration is further encouraged by how the crafting system works. See, crafting anything other than the lowest base level gear in the game requires you to find and learn the recipe for the item to craft it. And finding recipes is very RNG dependent. If you want to make a full set of copper armor, you would need to find the recipe for a copper helmet, a copper plate, copper shoes, and copper gloves, as well as a copper weapon and a copper enhanced shield. You'd be extremely lucky to find all of those before you start finding the stuff for bronze, which is the next tier up. And then just kind of rinse and repeat that for the next tier of items. And it feels really bad when you find a recipe for, say, a bronze helmet, or you don't even own a copper helmet yet, or even have the materials to craft the bronze one that you just found the recipe for. And this is a kind of issue that echoes throughout the entire game, with the progression being very RNG dependent. Ship upgrades require you to find these stones of power, which can spawn in dungeons but can also drop from bosses, and in rare cases you can find them and mine them out of the world. Increasing ship height is dependent on finding specifically these, and it doesn't matter if you are overgeared and finding the current content too easy, you can't progress until you find enough of these rare stones. And while it seems like they have plenty of spawn spots, it also feels like it is very RNG dependent on if they're actually going to be there. They take a while to find, or at least they took me a while to find, and even longer if you accidentally waste a couple of them on upgrading gear that will soon become redundant, which is a very easy mistake to make before you find out that the stones are better put to use elsewhere. Certain resources that you need to craft extra parts for your ship also come from exploration by finding islands with crashed airships and scrap. And a lot of this exploration-based progression would be okay if the ship wasn't so damn slow. You just spend a lot of time, especially early in the game, just wasting time flying between islands because you don't know what you're looking for to progress. That's probably okay, like if you're okay with the game being a bit of a slow burn. Everwind is definitely a slow burn of a game, and it maybe a bit too much of it seems unnecessarily long. Look, your experience may differ, it could be faster, it could be slower because, quite a bit of it is RNG. Combat in Everwind is okay, pretty similar to that other game that I keep talking about. There is a bit more of an RPG element with the game, with skill tree unlocks tied to leveling up, and there is also magic and spells, which are pretty cool. The enemy AI could definitely use some work. Pretty much every mob in the game, including the boss mobs, are very easily cheesable. Most of the time it's not like I'm, trying to stand somewhere that they can't get. They could path to me, they just choose not to. Or some of them just seem to have no sense of self-preservation and drown in knee-high water. This really needs to be worked on. Overall, I think the gameplay as a whole of Everwind is okay. It does have some problems. I really like the exploration of the game. The dungeons in particular are very fun to run around in and explore. The ability to have a quick return teleport to your ship is a great idea. There is a good variety of things to find. The drawback to that is that the game showers you with items that you won't have a use for or know what to do with for a long time, so you'll end up with chests filled with just random crap. I do like that the standard stack size is 200. They could probably bump that up to 999 and save chest space. On that note, actually, I'd really like for the developers to add the ability for crafting tables to be able to take from nearby chests. This just kind of feels like a quality of life feature that is pretty essential to surviving and farming sim games nowadays. There are a couple of things that I do think Everwind really does excel in. I think the music in this game is very great. It does an awesome job of setting the atmosphere of the game. The art style as well is very well defined. There isn't anything that looks like it doesn't belong in the game. Of course, the overall art style is a little derivative, but the weather effects, lighting, and background look very nice. Also, there's just something about floating islands in the sky that is very cool aesthetically. I think the enemy NPC designs are pretty good as well. I definitely want to see what else they can cook up with in this art style. The art and music are pretty great. I don't have any notes. Alright, moving on to performance. The game seems to run pretty well for the most part. My specs are on the screen. The game runs pretty decently at a solid 60 FPS at 1440p. There was some major frame loss whenever I would load up the world, as well as whenever I was traveling between islands and the game would need to generate new islands to visit because the game is procedurally generated. And when this is happening, the game becomes unplayable for about 10 to 20 seconds while things will generate and load. It's not ideal, but this never really happens at any critical parts of the game when you're actively doing things. When it comes to bugs in the game, The enemy AI is really the only thing that I can point out that doesn't seem to work as intended. Other than that, the game was stable, no crashes or any other bugs that I could find or point out. Moving on to the Steam Deck, the game seems to work great on the deck. Well, it runs great. The controls are a little finicky, mostly when it comes to menu navigation. There are shortcuts to get things you need to do done, but it is much more convoluted. I imagine people who play Minecraft on console would be able to find a way to deal with this, but as someone who's only ever played that on PC, it's very hard for me to acclimatise using a controller over mouse and keyboard for this kind of game. Overall, I think Everwind is a decent game. I know it does sound like I was pretty negative for most of this review, but it was able to get 15 hours out of me, and I probably didn't need to play any more than 10 to write this review. If you're looking for a game that is like Minecraft but not Minecraft, this will do the trick. The biggest changes to the Minecraft formula are what make it more interesting, but also where the game's edges feel a bit more jagged. Building a skyship and tying progression and difficulty of the game to the higher altitude is fun. Progression and unlocking things are slow and frustrating due to having to find recipes for things before you're able to make them. There is a great atmosphere and the music is very enjoyable. The performance is good for the most part unless the game is generating islands or loading content, in which case prepare for the game to be a little bit unplayable. The game is available now on Steam for $25 US or $35 Australian, and supposedly has a major content update planned for May. The developers also seem keenly aware of some of the problems in the game, mainly things to do with stabilizing multiplayer, but also adding the ability for crafting tables to be able to pull from nearby chests, which I'd love to be in the game ASAP. Do I think the game is worth buying? Kind of. See, when I review early access games, I don't like to put much reliance on what the game could be in the future. If you're buying a game now, you've got to be happy with what you're getting now. Early access is a mystery box. You don't know what you're going to get, and half the time the developers don't even know what they're going to make. Things change and every person has a different expectation on what the end product is going to be. I think this game has some great ideas, and I can see different ways that it could grow and become, an amazing product, but I'd also like to see the developers smooth out the current experience. Something as simple as finding a recipe for, say, like a high tier helmet could retroactively unlock that same item for earlier tiers, could smooth out some of the tedium and frustration with how unlocking recipes in this game works. Maps would definitely be good. I don't know how they would make it work, seeing as there's like a lot of 3D geometry they have to deal with altitudes and stuff. Marking interesting islands that you can't reach so you can return to later. Little things like that I just feel like really could smooth out the experience. As for the game right now, it's fine. You can get an easy 25 hours out of the game. Sure, a couple of those hours feel like they're not really meant to be there, but you can spend that time between islands doom scrolling on your phone or maybe watching some more of my videos. That sounds like a cool thing to do between islands. So this game is a hesitant recommendation. If you're happy with how the game sounds like it is now, then I say go for it. If you're on the fence, I say maybe wait for them to make content and see what issues they address and what content they add. Or maybe it's probably just better to wait for a sale. As for the question, does Everwind do enough differently to stand on its own? I think it does. I really do like the direction it's taking, and despite my grievances with the game, I'm very hopeful for Everwind's future. And that's all I have to say on Everwind. So thanks for watching this video. Please leave it a like if you liked it and consider subscribing if you are new. Many thanks to my YouTube members for their continued support, always appreciated, and I will see you all soon.